What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Omnic Lab. This is episode 149 of the show, and this week we're talking all about self-diagnostics. Normally, we're a podcast that talks about Overwatch, and we're going to be sticking to that script pretty tough today. We're usually the ones talking all about strategy. We learn about trial and error, even if things get a bit crazy with our scientific method and blow up. We're here to learn alongside of our listener base, and we're players just like the rest of you. My name's Rob. I'm coming in from a very late evening on a Monday, April 7th for me. And then also in the morning of April 7th, Andres Gomez, all the way in the Americas region. Sorry, I'm currently in Japan for those new, and Andres is coming in from Georgia, United States. What's up, dude?
What's up? I do apologize for the listeners for the stuffy noses today. I think that Rob has been having some trouble over there cleaning up garbage stuff, and over here is getting like kind of cold for getting to the summer. So we woke up both super stuffy. But that being said, we're ready to talk all about self-diagnostics today. Rob and I have been doing a lot of coaching sessions in the past few weeks. It's been super awesome getting to work with some of you guys. And while doing so, I think we have noticed a couple of things that kind of tend to repeat themselves between another of the people that we've been coaching with. And I think it's worth it talking about it, right? Because having a second person there giving you an opinion and stuff can make you improve really quick. But you can also do that yourself in a sort of way, especially if you're critical about your play. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely, and I'm just glad to be back. I also want to give a special shout out to Frito and your Overwatch for filling in my shoes last week and doing an absolutely better job than I would have done. So I really am happy that he was here. Wish I could have been here to hang out with Frito again. It was fun hanging out with him when we were doing some PTR testing a couple weeks ago. But I'm really glad that he was able to come on the show with us that time. Before we get really rolling with the ball going this week, Andres, you guys didn't happen to talk through any of the game night stuff because I wasn't there. Do you want to do a quick recap of last game night?
Yeah.
Since I only made a couple, my in-laws were here, so I only made a couple games and then had to peace out. But Andres, how was it for you?
I got to start the game night. I unfortunately couldn't stay for too long for the same reasons. I had like family stuff with my girlfriend. But that being said, game night was a blast. Like always, people were there around like 8 p.m. Eastern. If you guys have not attended a game night, we definitely recommend that you guys do. We had a lot of new faces this time, actually. I wish I could have hung out for a little longer because it's one of the best times that I get to actually meet some of the listeners, or sometimes people who come haven't even listened to the show before. They're just like, hey, my friend just told me that this is a really cool event that goes on, and I'm here to like hang out. So we get people from all over the place. Just in general, people who want to play Overwatch with others. It's a great place to meet others. And if you don't have any friends in your friends list, trust me, after a game night, you'll be set. You'll have like 30 people in there that you can like play with. That is if you socialize and you hang out for a little bit. They last for a really long time, so I recommend just kind of like come hang out, stay for a little bit, even if you don't get to play every game.
Right.
In the off game, it's a great chance to talk to your peers and give a little banter, like, hey, you saw that Widow headshot I got you with last round or something.
Yeah, game nights have been a really good boon for our podcast and something that we love doing at the end of every month, keeping things consistent. Ours was at the end of April. The next one will be May 31st at the end of May. Hope to see you guys come out for that. We won't really belabor the point too much, but I will say that I had the privilege of going out to another community's game night because I had to scratch that itch, and since my in-laws were here, I wanted to go do one. So the following week or the week prior, I can't remember which, I went to go hang out with the Chaos Crew / Mayhem folks. Tundra had invited me, one of our big community members of the show, and I went over there to go hang out and play some games with them, and that ended up being fun. Not quite as large, but they're trying to do their community events over there, so big shout out to them for having some fun, and some of our regulars ported over there as well. Have a brief Patreon announcement for you guys again. As per usual, since we're talking about coaching, it's through our Patreon that we do it. It's a great little perk for us to make sure that we're not like overwhelmed with how many requests that we're getting. It kind of putting that little pay gap kind of helps us ease a lot of the pressure of requests that we do get in for something like this, but it's been great having them. So please submit them. If you are a existing patron that has already received this service, remember this is once per month. So even though you got your previous patronage to do your gosh dang it, your coaching session, you can do it again for this next month now that it's May. So and also this is for all tiers above the platinum level. So plat and diamonds level sponsors can also get benefits of this. We are Omnic Lab is presented in large part by a Top Score Solutions as a big sponsor of the show. They are an esports oriented community and business for business education, analytics, as well as developing businesses, apps, services, organizations, all generated around gaming and esports. If you want to check them out, please go check them out over at their esports podcast and their website for topscoresolutions.com. They also have a small community in Discord. You can go check them out there and ask any questions you're looking for with I Need Peeling in our Discord or in their Discord. Last up is Switch Fox, who had a really cool appearance on Andres's other show and our sister show, Owl Recap. Andres, you want to talk a little bit about that real quick?
Yeah, if you guys want to catch the Switch Fox and see what he's been up to, you can always tune into Owl Recap for the latest episode. It should be out by tonight. So by the time you're hearing this, you should be good to go. We had a pretty awesome discussion on how Stage 2 has gone or has panned out and what he thinks it's gonna end or how he thinks it's gonna end. Also, he's been doing some cool stuff with the website as well, still playing with stats. He's been planning on releasing a few new articles now that the stage is coming to an end. So I definitely recommend you guys checking it out, especially if you're into stats or have used Omnic Meta before. Because Switch has been a little bit busy lately, so he hasn't been out and about as much. But here's his first appearance for the year, so check it out.
All right, with that being said, let's get into self-diagnostics. So I'm going to kind of lay a little bit of groundwork as to what self-diagnostics is and kind of how we're labeling our terms here as we get into this. We're basically approaching this whole topic of what are some common mistakes that we've seen in coaching and how have Andres and I been seeing some of the same things that we coach other players to do that we also fall into the same traps of in our own gameplay. On top of that, we would like to kind of help you kind of coach yourself with the self-diagnostics and kind of evaluate how you're playing while you're playing, as well as after a game or after a death or after a team fight has kind of occurred. What are some things that you should be kind of being aware of, or things that are going right, things that are going wrong? Positive feedback is always super hard in Overwatch because in some roles specific to like tanks and healing, if you're basically not dying, sometimes those things don't really have an immediate what we call feedback loop or a way for that information to get back into your head that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And it can also be deceptive in those roles where you're doing those things, you're not dying, you're kind of breaking even, you're having an even effectiveness, but at the same time, there could be some glaring issues that you just could be completely glazing over because of the feedback loop not really hitting you, if that makes sense. So when we're looking at self-diagnostics, we're trying to find and identify key features of your gameplay that you can internalize and identify even if something doesn't seem to be going wrong, if that makes sense. And also, we're also going to use if something's going wrong as another trigger feedback loop because those are the obvious ones, the more easy ones to identify.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to start over here? We have different categories that we have kind of like divided everything into. And I think that they're worth it kind of like going just one by one and talking about them. I think that each one is very important in the overall gameplay experience. Let's start with the most obvious one for a first-person shooter, and that is aiming. Very hot topic. There's like a million guides out there that will teach you how to aim.
We've got one too.
Yeah, there's thousands of tips. At the end of the day, though, aiming comes down to muscle memory. This is one of those skills that is just like learning an instrument or going to the gym or learning a sport. You have to practice it over and over and over. And there's no amount of guides or no amount of advice that will outright just make you better at it. There are some things that you should keep in mind though as you're improving, because just like when you're learning an instrument, it's very easy to pick up bad habits that will haunt you uh, until the end of times, and they become much harder to correct the more and more you get used to playing with bad habits. So at least let's talk about a few of those bad habits and things that you should keep in mind when you're trying to get better with your aim. Now, in Overwatch, it's not like CS:GO, right? Where aiming is everything, right? If you are a
Could be
god at
predictive.
yeah, if you're a god at aiming, you will probably kill the whole enemy team just by yourself. In Overwatch, we have a little bit more diversity, right? We have heroes that don't actually require like that much intensive aim, right? Like Reinhardt or Winston, they still require some, but they're not as demanding as Widowmaker, for example. But you have both ends of the spectrum in Overwatch, and I think that having good aim benefits you even on the heroes that have been normally not been accepted as aim intensive heroes, like Reinhardt. One of the biggest problems that I see with aim is I see a lot of people making the job a lot harder on themselves than it should be, right? And I don't know if you've been maybe seen this before, but I see people sometimes trying to do a little bit too much with their aim. And they make their jobs a lot harder. They move all over the place. They're switching their angles quite quickly. They're not very steady with how they scan for people. Their nuance in how they move their mouse is a little bit too harsh, meaning that they might move it a little bit too quick for their own good. Or they might panic a little bit, and instead of trying to follow a character or react with their aim, they're more of maybe trying to predict a little bit too much, moving a little bit too all over the place. Have you seen this happen before?
Yeah, I can agree with pretty much all of what Andres is saying here, because when you're looking at especially low level play, people panic like really frequently and swing wildly the mouse, even when it's okay to do that, like on Reinhardt or on Winston. But they sacrifice a lot of their vision and focus in those moments. So it's good to not panic when that Genji is getting on your butt, or when you're trying to track a tracer that's 180 blinking through your character model. How do you deal with that, or how do I work on my predictions? The key is not really working through the predictions until you have the fundamentals of aiming and tracking down. There's lots of tracking exercises that I recommend. In fact, I on one of the coaching sessions that I was doing, I was helping one of the folks go into the training room and practice a couple things is what to find out how they were overcompensating for their aim because they weren't sure on their settings. And it could be something as simple as settings, and also like just double and triple checking some things like your hertz and your bit rate, or not your hertz, but your like your monitor refresh rate. If you're using like a refresh rate on your computer and you don't have that setting turned on in game, that can affect you. This gentleman that I was working with also had different settings for aiming, sensitivities for different heroes. That's a big no-no. In general, there is something where you can do like a half or a double or a third of your aim, up or down on the spectrum, depending on certain heroes. I talked with some people that recommended that I double my sensitivity when I wanted to play heroes like Genji, or Tracer, because higher sensitivities benefit those heroes with regards to being able to turn around quicker. And if you can kind of double your stuff, then it has a scaling muscle memory, so you're not actually losing a whole lot. You're just kind of tightening what you're doing existing. And then the last thing that I'll say on aim is something that we have to go way back to our aim guide that we did with Baymax when he was here. And that was when I jumped into some custom games with him. He was saying that not enough people in Overwatch use their movement keys to help them aim. They use their movement keys to move. And in Overwatch and other first person shooters on PC, as well as you guys playing on console, I feel like the console community actually understands this a bit more. The more you play on console, the more you realize that the left and right on your main analog stick, or sorry, on your right thumbstick, and your up and down on your left thumbstick are critical to your aiming and not to your movement. And so when you're moving in the game, you want to make sure that you're kind of remembering that when you're turning your character model around with your left and right on your mouse, that you can also offset a lot of that with your A and D keys to turn left and right or move left and right in the game, strafing.
Absolutely. With aim, I'm a big proponent of work smarter, not harder. A lot of people equate good aim with being able to do insane flicks or like 180 turn headshot kind of thing. Fly with Widow up and top and, get nail somebody in the head with a super fancy shot. And they equate that with good aim. But honestly, sometimes it comes down to, are you being practical with your aim? And the more that you are, the more value you tend to get. Like, yeah, everybody loves seeing the crazy flicks or, tracking the head with soldier like it's glued to their head. And yes, that is impressive. And hopefully you can get there one day with practice. But a lot of the times, those crazy shots that you see are just a matter of good habits getting built over time and adding up and culminating into those plays. Instead, you should be more concerned with, are you keeping a steady aim and are you aiming at the right position? Um, are you able to react quickly to events that are happening? And to do that, you don't necessarily have to be like the biggest aim prodigy. Instead, you just have to be mindful of where things are and how they're coming at you. It's blended a little bit with positioning, like Rob was saying. You can use your movement keys a lot to help you out with that. But I've been a big proponent of framing the battle the right way, especially if you're playing heroes like Anna, for example, that can sometimes need to, zoom in their scopes and lose a lot of their mobility. Um, but it gives you a lot of control over your aim and your shots. So if you're able to frame the battle the right way, where you're able to see key characters that you need to be able to see both enemies and teammates, hopefully covering your back with a wall or something else, so you minimize the angles at which people can approach you. So in that way, you're not having to worry. Oh, I have to turn right. I have to turn left. I have to turn behind me because they're coming from all sides, and my teammates are all around me. Instead, be more concerned with, where can I position myself so I don't have to do that. So maybe I just have to adjust my aim in a 90-degree angle instead of an 180-degree angle, right? Like that is so much easier to manage. Also, practicing what is the best way to aim with your hero. I've been teaching my girlfriend a lot. And one of the habits that I notice a lot is that they're not too concerned where their cursor is placed pre-battle, right? And this happens a lot with newer people. I see them aiming at the floor all of the time. And it's unconscious to them, right? They're not really thinking about it. It's like, well, there's no enemies around, so let me just look at like where I'm going kind of thing. But for the most part, you could be aiming at head level, right? Like if you're a Zenyatta, just go ahead and aim where you think the heads of enemies are going to be coming out and shoot your orbs at that height. You might not be getting all of your shots, but if you do get a shot, it might be a critical hit. So just adjusting your height and being preemptive, right? If you know they're going to come around the wall, maybe you should be aiming at that corner, right? You know that they're behind it, and you know that there maybe is only one pathway around there. Go ahead and do yourself a favor and already be aiming that way, so that as soon as you see them, the adjustment that you have to do is much smaller than if you're looking somewhere else. And by the time you see them, you have to do a big adjustment. Even with small things like AD strafing, right? If you're playing with Widowmaker or you're playing with McCree or Soldier 76, one of the easiest ways to mitigate damage from these heroes is just AD strafe. And I see a lot of people get a little bit confused by it, or not confused, but countered by the AD strafe, right? Because they see the heroes moving back and forth so fast, and I just see them trying to track him back and forth and like doing these really hard shots. And it at that point, try to be a little bit more what's the word that I'm looking for over here? Like judge how they're moving.
Practical.
Are they doing like really short AD strafing? Because if that's the case, you might be better off just aiming straight down the center and firing straight up rather than trying to follow them, right? If they're doing really long AD strafing, can you try to time it? Again, I try to put my cursor either on the edge of the AD strafe or right in the middle, and I just wait for them to come into my cursor rather than
It's
I
called
having,
placement.
yeah, rather than I have to be chasing. So there's a few things that you gotta keep in mind with aiming, right? Like, don't try to make your life so much harder. Instead, try to find ways to make it a lot easier for you to aim at the places where you want to aim.
Yeah, that goes hand in hand with just using your A and D buttons on your keyboard and placing your crosshair in one place and not moving it. Kind of putting it at the same level, not moving it left to right, but just kind of matching your left to right movement and using that to fire or shooting in the middle of where you're trying to hit. And remember, if somebody's AD strafing so hard that they're trying to dodge all of your shots, they can't dodge everything if you're just aiming for the body. You have a bigger target there, you can go for it. And I teach, this is the number one thing I teach players that are playing Winston, Reinhardt, and especially Ana. Especially Ana. If you're playing Ana, both in your healing and in your damage, you do not need to worry about anything besides hitting the target. Every single one of your abilities, aside from the sleep dart, doesn't benefit from headshots. And even the sleep dart, getting a headshot is completely inconsequential. So don't worry about getting headshots. You just need to make sure you're hitting targets. So you can increase your discipline on other heroes by still aiming for the head, but you're in essence hurting yourself when you're playing Ana in that sense because you're just trying to hit allies and enemies in a hitbox, not a head hitbox. The hitboxes are much larger.
And aiming is not the end all be all of Overwatch, but it surely gives you a huge edge over things. When you're able to hit your shots, even if it's just one more shot or like two more shots in general that maybe you were not hitting in that fight before, it can literally make the difference of you winning the match or not. And this is not only for aim intensive heroes, this is for every hero in Overwatch out there. If you have good aim and good prediction and you're Reinhardt and you're able to nail your fire strikes, you will probably put more pressure on the enemy to not engage you. The Ana might be having to use her nade more often on herself. Um, Likewise with Ana. If you can hit that extra one shot on your Reinhardt and heal him just barely enough so that the enemy Reinhardt couldn't kill him, that might be the difference right there of you winning that battle or not winning that battle. If you're able to hit the shots that you had no business hitting, and I keep thinking about Ana because she's a very aim intensive hero that the better you get with her at landing your shots, the more you can carry your games, right? If you see the Genji all the way across the map, he's one health, he's dueling the other Ana, he's about to die, and you just happen to clutch it with your aim and just hit him from across the map. One heal. Maybe that's all he needed. Maybe that one heal was the one thing that prevented the Ana nade from completely obliterating him. Or the Ana was so sure that the last hit wasn't going to kill him, but wasn't counting on your heal. And now your Genji gets to kill the Ana rather than the other way around. That little difference of you were in the right place, you were framed the right way, you didn't panic, and you got that shot off can be a huge, huge difference maker. Not only that, but you will notice that as your aim improves, your ultimate charge rate grows quite a bit. It's the difference between maybe getting one ultimate in the whole round and getting two ultimates, sometimes three. The pros can sometimes get an ultimate almost every fight. And this is not because they're intrinsically playing the character so much different than you, but they're taking every opportunity that they have to get significant damage in. Um, so aiming
I'm glad you
has
brought that up because there's one thing about aiming that's been really clutch for a lot of players is, especially in the coaching sessions that we've been having, where Andres, I'm sure you've noticed this, where players that are using firing based heroes, especially healers like Ana and Baptiste and Zenyatta, when you're firing with a large, swath of ammunition, you typically overfire. I see Ana's doing this so much at every rank, where they're literally just firing just to fire. They're hitting targets, they're doing things. It's like, look, you hitting your ally when they're at full health is wasting your ammunition. You playing Zenyatta and just firing at the choke when nothing's there is wasting your ammo. And also holding your right click with Zenyatta, especially if you're doing your volley, just to volley, is using ammunition that shouldn't be used in a 1v1 situation, or if you're trying to delete somebody. Use every single one of those shots to make sure you're landing on a target, whether it's a heal or a hit. Every shot matters in Overwatch.
Yeah, be
So
very
make sure you're hitting them.
purposeful. Yeah, be very purposeful with your shots. Make
Don't
sure that
just
you're
fling them
firing.
willy-nilly.
Make sure that you're firing them for a reason. There are times where you might want to spam, like if you know they're all concentrated in like a one choke, and there's at any time they might come through. It might be worth it to kind of like shower them with bullets. But for the most part, that's not really the case, and you should be
Yeah.
more picky with how you're using your bullets. Yeah, especially with heroes like Ana or Zenyatta. Zenyatta is incredibly vulnerable when he is out of ammo or right after he's used the volley. It's one of my favorite times to actually dive in with Genji or Tracer or Sombra. Sometimes I'll be invisible and I'll see the Zenyatta charging the volley, and I time my invisibility. Like the second I see the Zenyatta's about to start firing his volley to the opposite end, I start coming out.
Breaking Viz.
I break invis and I start firing at him, and for a split second they panic, right? Because they have no bullets and it takes them a few seconds. It buys me time to start damaging them to the point where I either kill them or they have to run to their team, or sometimes even they blow their transcendence. So keep that in mind, right? When you're out of bullets, you're very vulnerable. So be very purposeful with your shots so that doesn't necessarily happen to you. And again, you want to have those shots ready when the time is to clutch it, right? If you're Ana, like Rob was saying, and you're just firing shots kind of all over the place without much purpose, maybe to allies that are already fully healed, then when your Genji actually needs your help and he's dying to the side and spamming I need healing, you're not going to have those shots, right? You might have to be reloading.
Clicking and holding is one of the biggest enemies to a lot of players out there. Ana players, Soldier players, Mei Icicles, Zenyatta players, even left click holding down a key that is a primary fire just so that you can keep the stream going and hitting the max like rate of fire is such a huge detriment. Click and hold it a couple times to see what the pace is. Try to memorize that pace or try to get a good feel for the pace, and then manually click when you can hit those shots so that you're in control when you're firing, and don't just click at pace, because there's two things you have to break: clicking and holding, and then clicking at pace just to do it. You want to click at pace, but also aiming your shots at each interval and then releasing it, even if it means holding off on just a millisecond longer to make sure that you line it up.
I'm glad that you brought pace up too, because yes, every hero has like a cadence, right? Like a pace that they can fire bullets at. Reinhardt can swing his hammer like this fast kind of thing. McCree can fire his revolver this fast. And it is important that you are familiar with his cadence. That being said, you don't have to fire shots as fast as you have them available to you. And this was one thing that I really learned when I was trying to practice my McCree. I was very eager to just fire as many shots as I could as fast as possible. And it took me a minute to just be like, maybe instead I'll just slow down a little bit. And instead of fire my clip as fast as I can do it, I'll just fire it as fast as I think I can hit the shots, right? And I think it's more important that you slow down and you hit the shots that you're firing than speed up and miss your entire clip. Because at that point, yeah, you get the clip out as fast as possible, but it did almost nothing. Instead, if I slow down a little bit and I landed maybe 2 of the shots from my clip, that is putting up some pressure, right? That is demanding that the enemy team heal themselves, or maybe the hero that was getting aggressive is changing their mind because now he has 2 shots in his head, and getting
Mm-hmm.
aggressive doesn't sound that good of an idea anymore, right? So being able to keep up that pressure through shooting is very, very important in Overwatch. It can sometimes be the difference between your team just getting run over, or maybe having more of a steady control fight where the enemy team has to be more careful about their approach because your shots are getting in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So take your time, like really make every shot count. I rather have an Anna that only fired 3 shots but hit all 3 shots than an Anna that fired 8 but only hit one of them. Um,
You can also practice this by getting with somebody that you know that maybe is really good with you, really good at Overwatch, like much better than you, and or just a friend, and just tell them that their whole job is to dodge you. All they need to do is dodge as best they can. They don't not going to return any fire, and you're only allowed 1 clip or less. Like I did a drill with a friend of mine that I was coaching in Grandmaster that was trying to improve their Ana play because they were playing a lot of other support heroes and they wanted to get better Ana. And I said, okay, your task is to 1v1 me. We're not going to shoot any shots except for sleep darts. And that's all we can do. And whoever lands the first sleep dart just wins. So you basically are establishing these drills that you're doing together with a friend. And then you start implementing other tasks where you say, okay, now we're doing this out in the open only. Next, we can utilize cover. Anywhere in the map, you can do it. And it's only sleep darts. You can even go into the new workshop or the new, or just the regular creator and just turn off of certain abilities to go do these drills. Additionally, you can do other drills, which is like combo drills that we did with Ana as well, where if you hit the sleep dart, you now have to kill a Genji before he can dash away from you. So you have to do this thing where you line up with where the Genji is laying, where they're facing when they stand up, so that when they stand up and dash away, you just aim your cursor up a little bit so that on their way out of the dash, you're still hitting them with the next shot. So they don't live through the thing, and they can't stand up and deflect you even if their deflect is up. That's how you do certain things, and there's all kinds of guides and stuff. If you're looking for it, you can Google it, you can hit YouTube. It's very easy to go find these guides. That's why I'm not doing anything besides a few specific things. And of course, I'm highlighting Ana because that's the one here I have the most things on, as well as Andres talking about McCree and likely Ash. But let's get into positioning because that's what's the next thing.
before we get into positioning, I just wanted to recapitulate really quick. Aiming, super important that you guys are practicing
Super
on your
important.
own all the time. It's a muscle, and just like playing an instrument, it requires you to have practice on it. But that being said, keep in mind the things that we said. Work smarter, not harder. Try to frame the battle in the right positions. Try to be able to have heroes in your line of sight that are important, both enemies and allies as needed. And take your time firing the shots. We can't teach you raw aim. That's just gonna require you going into the game and putting in the practice yourself. But do build up some good habits. Slow down until you're able to hit your shots. Make sure your aim is not erratic and all over the place. Keep it as steady as you can. Keep it aimed at angles where you know people are going to come out, or the bulk of the battle is going to be in. And if you're not in direct danger or line of fire, you don't need to make your job harder and be moving all over the place. Instead, steady up your aim and, lock down a position, hold it, and fire from there until you get pressured and you have to move. Obviously, that comes with caveats. Don't just be standing still when a Widowmaker is on the map and she's looking for you, kind of thing. But if there's not that pressure, right? Like, you don't need to be moving all over the place. Like, sometimes I'll see a soldier that is getting like no pressure at all, and their AD strafing like crazy and firing. And it's like,
Or
dude,
jumping, which is
yeah,
even more common.
yeah, or jumping. Yeah, don't make your life harder, right? Like, you're already having to track the movement of heroes. Don't use your movement to counter that, right? Or use your movement smartly to follow that. I
Yeah.
think
I
that
will
that
say that,
summarizes it.
yeah, that's a good summary. Let's move into positioning though, because we don't want to spend the whole episode on aim theory like we did in the past. So, um, when you're doing positioning, the one thing I want you to keep in mind is actually the nature of the game. The game is an objective-based, team-based shooter, not a like FPS kill everything. Like this is not deathmatch if you're trying to gain rank, unless you're in a team-based deathmatch that is ranked in the arcade, and that's what you want to care about. As positions in Overwatch are dictated, the number one thing in the game is very similar to what it would be in a MOBA, which is don't die. Living longer means more than getting more kills and confirming targets. If you can outlive your opponent before the fight is over, generally speaking, the higher you climb, the more each kill matters, because every person that survives matters more than each person that's dying, if that makes sense. More living targets is more valuable than getting a kill confirm and doing what we call trading. If you're trading a kill for the enemy team to kill you so that the game goes to a 5v5 instead of a 6v6, it's kind of inconsequential unless you're trading a different role. If an Ana goes in to go kill a Genji and the Ana and the Genji both die, which team wins the fight? The team without the Ana will always lose. In general speaking
theory,
terms,
in
theory, on paper with no ultimates present, okay? That's kind of the idea, is that supports and tanks are typically valued at a higher ratio than DPS characters, especially given that ultimates are out. That's why you're seeing teams in Overwatch League and Pro Play and Contenders, and even in like some of your ranked games, where if a Reinhardt or a Winston as a main tank in a team roster team composition die first, that fight's over in a lot of ways, unless you're playing these 3-3 compositions in ranked play, which is frankly, GOATS is not as common as it once was. With regards to solo queue.
And the latter is basically non-existent until you get into the very high ranks. GOATS is definitely becoming a very organized team kind of composition. That being said, though, positioning can be one of the hardest things to self-diagnose, especially if you're just playing by yourself. Sometimes it's really hard to tell when you are in the wrong place, but there are some tells. Overwatch is very much a team game, and the best way to stay alive and prolong your life is to revolve around your team and act accordingly with your team. I play a lot of DPS characters, and one of the biggest lessons that I've had to learn as a DPS player is my pressure and the things that I'm bringing into the battle need to revolve around my team. Sometimes it makes no sense for me to go get aggressive or put pressure in before my team has even a chance to capitalize on it, right? And it takes a minute, especially in Overwatch, where you don't have a mini map like you do in a MOBA, and you can kind of click and see where everyone is. In Overwatch, you have to keep track of your team a little bit differently, right? You can see them through walls, and you can see their names and their little chevrons through walls, kind of like a wall hack. So you can always kind of like do a 180 and see where your team is hanging out. But one of the best things that you can do with positioning is track where your team is at all times, especially your tank, right? Like your tank is your engagement. And it doesn't matter if maybe your tank is not being super aggressive at first or is taking him some time to engage. You're much better off just waiting for them to be ready to engage and then engaging yourself. And keeping in mind your position of both your tank and your healers. And I'm talking from a DPS perspective. We can go into tanks and healer perspectives in a second. But if you're able to keep that in mind and able to track where they are and get aggressive in those moments, one, your tank will be putting pressure, two, demanding space, hopefully contesting for the objective. Two, your healers will probably have line of sight of you. So if you do get focused fire or something goes wrong, you might be able to quickly get back to them, or knowing that they're in the backline and where the backline is might allow you to just quickly just get back if you're Tracer or you're Genji or something, get healed. But it's very important that you keep in mind the position of everyone else, because just like playing Dota or just like playing League of Legends, you need your team and you want to make fights as uneven as possible in your favor as you can. take 2v1s as much as possible. Take 6v5s as much as possible. Can you isolate a hero? And if he's isolated, is there anybody close to you, right? I see a lot of people playing Overwatch in the higher ranks or in the lower ranks that never think about where their team is and are instead more focused on where the enemy is. And a big part in positioning in this game is being able to track that. What do you think about this, Rob?
Yeah, this is the problem with the rest of the categories outside of aim, as they all overlap. We have things that we have listed here after positioning called approaches, overall awareness, using your abilities, and observing your teammates. And I'm sure Andres is glazing over these things as he's discussing, because when you're doing position, literally everything in the game revolves around positioning. Positioning includes your overall awareness of the game, what's called in like the hot button, the hot ticket, which is people saying game sense. Game sense is all about overall awareness, mixing that with your observation of enemies, their approaches, their disengages, your engages, your disengages, your teammates, etc., 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 etc. It's just this deep well of things that you have to be aware of. And when you're doing your positions, it's important to know that there is no always and never extremities here. There's no extremes in Overwatch that are always right to do. If you get a coach that tells you always do this or every time you should do this or never do that, in general, you always need to take that with a grain of salt, even if they sound correct or even if Andres and I tell you that. Because we're using these things because it's kind of a subculture to go to extremes with regards to how Americans typically interact in the English language in general. Okay. But doing these extremes is kind of giving you more of an extreme rule of thumb that you should abide by in most cases. And even those are subject to a plethora of things that you should be understanding have exceptions.
Yeah, positioning really comes down to like what is happening in the battle at the moment, right? What ultimates you have available, what ultimates the enemy team has available, what characters the enemy team has, right? That will inevitably change the way that you position. But here's a few tricks that maybe as you're playing the game, you can maybe keep in mind. And if these mistakes are happening to you, maybe it's time to revisit your positioning. But what the easiest tell is, did you die alone? When you die, pay really close attention to what is around you. And if you were alone, chances are you were positioned in the wrong place. Now, I don't care if the objective was getting capped. I don't care if maybe you thought that the Ana and the enemy team was alone and needed to die at that right second. If you died alone, chances are you're positioned in the wrong place. And this is going to vary per teams. Sometimes you get matched with teams that are very aggressive, and you actually can be very aggressive all of the time, dive in deep into the backline because your team is there and is doing that same thing. Sometimes you get paired up with more passive teams, and if you're the person who doesn't want to accept that and instead wants to go get aggressive all by yourself, then you're the one who's in a bad position. Again, your position is very related to where your team is, so you gotta try to adjust to the different paces or speeds that your team is playing with, because you will lose more fights by just trying to do things on your own than if you just try to work with your teammates. So really,
there's also a really fine line with your positioning, where when you're playing Overwatch in general, the more you're climbing, the less like the less of your positions are indicated by like good practice and what we call like the fundamentals of the game and the basics, or even just like overall, this is where I should be when I'm playing X and Y hero, or when I'm playing X and Y map. This is a good spot for me to go. Here's some of my favorite habits to be making. Good habit building is kind of your first kind of ramp to success, right? But then you get to a point in your gaming in Overwatch where there's a tipping point where all of those things about learning and building good habits and finding good spots and playing with your team starts tipping to the other sense, which is anticipating, seeing more, looking around, having kind of this live action, like, okay, my team literally just spun on a dime and now we're in. We're using a certain ability and now I have to adjust to that. Or rather, anticipating those events happening before they happen. That's the tipping point when you start trying to dip into higher ranked play. These type of things are the stuff that's going to start getting you from platinum and diamond further. That's kind of like the biggest thing. And even I would even venture to say getting you out of gold and platinum to platinum, like plat's this weird range where it's such a huge overpopulated thing. You can get pretty much people that belong in silver there, with regards to a lot of their things, but they have other things about Overwatch that they're really good at. It's kind of this weird amalgamation of good skill sets in this categories, but not in these categories. And so the game doesn't really know where to put them. And so they get put in the gold and platinum tiers. But like getting you into the diamond area is kind of getting a good swath of the aiming and the positioning, and then starting to transition into the anticipation realm.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with that. Further on that, I think that another way to be able to tell whether you're positioned in the right place or the wrong place is how much damage are you taking, or is the enemy team able to put a little bit too much pressure on you? And this one can sometimes be a little bit more obvious when you're playing things like healers or tanks. Um, but with Winston, for example, are you able to dive on the enemy team safely, right, without dying? I see a lot of Winstons take way too much damage before they're even able to get to the enemy team, right? Make that jump or
Midway through the engagement.
right. And usually that's a sure sign that you're being a little bit too obvious with your position, or your position is just being a little bit too open. With heroes like Winston, you have the ability to jump all over the map. So you really get to choose where you want to engage from. And you got to be very, very careful with where you engage from. Likewise with Hammond. There are heroes that are very sneaky and can open a lot of space for your team. But if you're not positioning right with them, there are also heroes that are very easy to focus down because they're so big. With Reinhardt's, I see the same thing. Yes, you have a giant shield you can hide from, but that doesn't mean that your shield lasts forever. And especially once you're playing against heroes or teams that are more coordinated, are better at focusing fire in your shield, that thing is not going to last very much if you're just hanging out in the open. You see some of the best Reinhardts, even though they have a shield, still hug around walls or play around corners where they know that if they need to, they can easily retreat to, and they only go out into the open when they want to engage with their team, right? A lot of good Reinhardts will actually just hold a position and wait for the enemy team to kind of come to them and then be like, this is where I make my stand, rather than like just walking out into the open into the enemy team and becoming a punching bag for them. For healers is the same thing. Is the Widowmaker getting shots on you and killing you constantly? Can the
Are you trying to contest them?
yeah, can the Ash or the Soldier pressure you a ton? Because normally they shouldn't be able to, right? If you're playing with good positioning and you're playing smartly and trying to keep in mind where they are and positioning to counter that, they actually should have a really hard time getting shots on you. So getting killed by a Widowmaker constantly is a sure way that should tell you I'm positioning wrong, right? It's not necessarily that your team is not killing the Widow fast enough, or, you know, your Winston is not putting pressure on her. Like, yeah, that comes down to it. But if you're the one who's dying to the Widow, then maybe it's your positioning that needs to be adjusted so you can buy some time for your Winston to actually put the pressure on her, or maybe force her to take riskier spots to try to take to you, and then your Winston has a really easy time getting to her, right?
Yeah.
So just
There's another
mind.
couple things that kind of go with this as well, and I'll say there's three because I'm going to list them now because there's a good chance I'll forget them in a minute. So Andres, you can help me with this. The first one that I want to discuss is a quick feedback loop of observing when your teammates are dying, and if there's something that you could do, and depending on your role, it'll look differently, right? And depending on their role, it'll also look differently with how you should interpret that feedback loop. The next one is high ground, and the third one is kiting. So those are three things that I want to talk about real quick. And I'd love, Andres, if you can interrupt me between each of these as well. So and again, all of these kind of overlap with approaching, positioning, overall awareness, and using your abilities in the game. So let's talk about the first one, the instant feedback loop of watching your allies die. Okay? If an ally dies, you need to see beyond the initial thing, which is, okay, they died, they were doing something really stupid, or they communicated that they were doing something and no one followed up on it. You need to see, like, what are some of the things that are true about this event before you start trying to make inferences about what the reasoning is behind it, or the results, the actuality of what happened. Okay? You want to find what's true. What's true about the event is this player died. They took a lot of damage. They might have also taken some of your healing. If you're a healer, you might have also tried to mitigate a little bit of the damage by presenting an ultimate on a DPS hero as compensation, or giving as a tank. Maybe you're playing Zarya, you're giving them a bubble, or maybe you're playing a diva and you're using your matrix, right? So what things happened during that scenario when they died, and where were they, and where were you? Because depending on what role you're playing and depending on where you are in relationship to that event, could dictate whether or not their death was basically a bait. Was it an initiation tool? Was their death completely necessary? Was it unnecessary? Was there more that you could have done to prevent that death? Or can you use that death as a stepping stool to get beyond that instead of disengaging? Or do you need to use that event as a tool to say, my position now needs to be disengaging, right? So you're using that tool as an instant feedback loop in two ways, where right now that event has already happened and I need to know what to do next instead of complaining about what happened. All right, that's the first thing that's happened. That's so tilting on a lot of the diamond games. Like, I feel like the higher people get up, the more they want to do the instant feedback loop into what they should have done and not what they should do right now as they're playing, not what the other guy should have done, right? That's the one thing that people get caught up with all the time in Overwatch. Don't worry about that until the fight is over and everyone's dead, all right? You want to do that when they're dead, what you should do next, how you should be making adjustments on the fly, and then after the fight's over, let's try to do something different. And don't worry about accusations, because it's not going to get you anywhere. Andres is really good about making sure that people don't do the accusatory game in his ranked games. I still do it because I get tilted, but Andres is really kind of like his many years of service in public relations have kind of trained him to not get tilted in those moments.
I try. I still get tilted every once in a while. It's unavoidable. But yeah, for the
usually
most part,
Roadhog.
Yeah, if Roadhog is hooking me, oh yeah, you can bet I'm insta tilted. The last thing I want to say about positioning, because I do agree with you, high ground, for example, is a great position or something to keep in mind. And I think that we have talked about high ground so many times. People always talk about,
right.
High ground, it's like the end all be all. And for the most part, yes, if it makes sense for you to get high ground, you should. Especially
you
with
give
heroes,
it up so easily.
Yeah, and you shouldn't give it up. You shouldn't let the enemy team have it. For the most part, as a known rule of thumb. But more importantly than that is make sure you are where you're needed. And this happens a lot at the lower ranks. You get a lot of flanking heroes. You get a lot of heroes that like, oh, I'm going to go around this position and catch them from the back. And that sounds like a great idea, right? Like, they're not expecting me from here. The shield is not going to be there. I might get to damage them in the back line where it's the most important. But what a lot of people don't realize is there's a huge opportunity cost when you're doing moves like that. And that opportunity cost comes in the form of pressure, and especially for your front line. And I see a lot of DPS doing this. I see sometimes tanks doing this, sometimes Roadhogs or Zaryas, going around to, get a sneaky grab or like a sneaky hook around here. Reapers do this all the time. Genjis do this all the time. Even McCrees kind of tend to fall in this trap because, I'm going to get a huge high noon from behind them kind of thing. But every time you're going one of these huge flanks, it's time where your front line or your team might be engaging in some sort of battle and they don't have your firepower right there. The Reinhardt shield might not be breaking because of this, or the Reinhardt of the enemy team just decided to get mega aggressive because guess what? There's nobody shooting at him and he can actually win space for his team. So positioning in this sense, you have to be where the action is as much as you can. And it ties down again to like being aware where your teammates are and when they're engaging, right? The biggest tell is your main tank engaged at that moment? If the answer is yes, if he's engaged, you should be there with him in one way or another. If at that moment in time you're doing a flank, you're in the wrong place. Maybe your tank got aggressive a little bit too soon. That does happen. Maybe he shouldn't have gotten aggressive there. But if he did, you should be there to support him. If he dies alone and he is the guy that is making space for your team and the guy that is engaging the fights, guess what? You don't have that guy anymore. And now your flank is almost worthless because by the time you go make the flank and come around, the enemy team has no pressure on them. There's no space being made for you. And the way that they're going to react to you is going to be much faster, if not incredibly aggressive. And your flank is going to come down to nothing. Like maybe you get lucky and you kill Diana. But then again, there's no front line in your team to capitalize on that. Yeah, they don't have the Ana anymore, but then their Reinhardt is not really in danger of dying either because nobody's putting pressure on him. So you really have to keep in mind where you're putting your pressure and how you're positioning so that this never happens. Again, Overwatch is a team game and you rely on your team. You're better off if your Winston is maybe getting too aggressive. Just be aggressive with him and die all together. I feel like your chances of winning that fight increase rather than like if you just take the individual play and try to do everything yourself or solve
Yeah.
everything with one wondrous flank.
One of the things that I learned from getting coaching, which is something that, sorry, getting coaching and then doing coaching was with regards to positioning is like, this kind of overlaps with the kiting thing I wanted to talk about, but it's really hard for some of these things to get feedback on if you're not getting another set of eyes to help you with it. Whether it's a peer at the same level or you reevaluating the same footage or you sending it into me and Andres or another coach. When I told some of the people in game night, for example, I had a game night friend that I was like, hey, I'm going to go spectate you tonight. And then, well, I have a game, session with him to do coaching later on. And I kept telling him, I was like, just remember, don't stand out in the middle of nowhere when you're doing stuff, or don't stand in the middle of the street when you're trying to, take pot shots, or when you're on DPS, don't stand out in the middle when you're trying to avoid shots and also contest somebody else. And they're like, okay. And so these type of things that we're saying, even verbally or in video or even while you're playing the game, are something that you don't know until somebody says you're doing it right now. Because it's really hard to say, I'm not contesting the Widow, I'm not standing out in the middle of the open, and then you instantly die because you're behind a Reinhardt shield and Diva Bomb exploded. Or something like that. I mean, I'm just using a silly example, but when I was getting coached way back when, I was standing out in the middle of open and I was like, okay, I'm going to get behind my Reinhardt shield and then I'm going to avoid the Diva Bomb. But the shield was like just slightly tilted up and angled the wrong way. And I was behind a car, or I wasn't quite behind the car, and the Diva Bomb blew me up. And this other guy died to a Widowmaker, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these other situations. And it's all boils down to I was standing in a format where I wasn't prepared to get behind cover that wasn't a teammate.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go and utilize the map that's in front of you, because the only thing you can trust is your keyboard and your mouse and where you can go, okay? Your teammates are always moving. The payload is always moving. There are certain things even on Busan with the walls going up and down that people get tilted by because they go down and the Diva explodes, or the grav drops, something like that. You have to use things that can take infinite amounts of damage that are barriers, like the cars on Numbani, like the wall that's in front of you. Those things can take infinite amounts of damage. You can use them as shields. And then you have to also be aware of things that are on the map that are always there or sometimes there as well. And the key thing here would be health packs. Being able to kite yourself around different pieces of cover and navigate from health pack to health pack to health pack. Pro tracers are really good at this because they don't utilize their healers. They use their abilities and they use the health packs because their whole job is being an annoying gnat that isn't dependent on their team. You have to understand your hero.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's
Let's move into one more thing, Andres, which is ability use. And then we'll probably close out the show here with that.
I wanted to, ability use and building ultimate. I think we can kind of tie those two together. I really did wanted to touch on this one because I think it's one of the other things that I see the most mistakes, especially now that I've been coaching people. Ability usage. There's two things I want to talk about abilities. One is how often you use them, and two is how are you using them. In Overwatch, it's very, very important that you maximize the number of abilities that you use every game. You want to use as many of them as you can. In order to do this, you have to be using them as often as possible. Because Overwatch is a time-limited game and all of your abilities have a cooldown, it means the more often that you use them, the more number of them you're going to get in a game. And that's great, right? We want to be using as many of them as we can. It's actually one of the best tools to sometimes build ultimates and gain an edge in the battle. That being said, you don't want to use him just in any way possible and just throw him out there with no reason whatsoever. But depending on the hero, you need to be able to recognize how often can you use him safely and in what situation, so that when they arise, you can just do it right away. Two examples that I can think of right off the bat. Ashe, for example, her dynamite is an amazing ability that can put an insane amount of damage and pressure into the enemy team, and is the difference maker of you getting a bob almost every fight, or just getting maybe one or two bobs the entire game. People that are just starting to learn Ashe don't realize the power of the dynamite and sometimes try to just get the bulk of their damage through shots, which is good, right? She actually deals quite a hefty amount of damage with her shots, but you're missing out on a ton of damage from the dynamite. Instead, I encourage you to get pretty creative and find ways to be able to hit that dynamite as often as possible in creative angles, because you can get a lot of damage in to several heroes, demanding the enemy healers to have to use their cooldowns, demanding the enemy tanks to have to use their shields. Like Zarya may have to pop her bubble or use her bubble to like shield the Zenyatta who's burning at her side. And not only that, you building your ultimate so fast. Another hero that can do this is Ana, for example. You can get an absurd amount of nano boosts as long as you're hitting your nade on several targets at a time. Something that is not necessarily easy to do and can sometimes be a little bit nerve-wracking, right? Because the cooldown on the Ana nade is so valuable, and sometimes you just kind of want to hold it to heal your team or keep your Reinhardt alive. But the more often that
8 seconds feels like an eternity.
Yeah. But if you're firing this thing every 8 seconds and you're hitting targets every time that you do, you can bet that you're going to build that ultimate incredibly, incredibly fast. Before we get into like the right usage of these abilities, what do you think about this? Do you try to use your abilities as often as possible? Do you sometimes find yourself saving them up for a little too long?
Thinking through a lot of the things in the game, with regards to a lot of our discussions on GOATs, especially because the game has really shifted since our talks back when I'm with the example that I'm going to use here. But when we had Skyline on, and when I watched a bunch of Skyline videos way back when he was a regular creator, the thing that stuck out to me most from what I've learned from him has been, how long is a typical Overwatch fight in real time? How long are those fights lasting? Do they last 30 seconds? Rarely. Now there are some times when you're playing like a goats comp or like a multi-healer comp with lots of tanks, there's lots of healing going on. The fights can last longer. But in general, fights are typically not going to last much longer than 30 seconds at their longest points. In most cases, some of the fights only last about 10 to 15 seconds. And most of the cooldowns in Overwatch are under that time period, and some of them are over 20 seconds or over 15 seconds. Things like Resurrection, things like Immortality Field, especially ultimates, right? Ultimates are way longer cooldowns because you have to build them to use them. And some of the cooldowns are on the upper echelon of those timers, 12, 10 seconds, those type of things. But if you have cooldowns that are like 2, 3, 6, 8 seconds, those type of abilities, the longer the fight goes, if you have really powerful things like anti-grenade and the fight is longer than 20 seconds and you haven't thrown both of those grenades in that fight, there's a really low chance that you're actually going to be utilizing your kit properly. Same applies when you're playing Genji, right? If you're not getting a dash into the fight and getting a reset on it, if you're not using your deflect accurately or using your deflect and getting something out of it and not just using it to escape, then you're not usually going to be doing that fight very well. There's so many things in Overwatch like this. Fire Strike is one of those things that people have gotten so ingrained in their mind that they need to Fire Strike as often as possible to build Earth Shatter that people like Andres and I and Diamond even will count the seconds because Fire Strike is 6 seconds. If you wait until that Reinhardt fires 6 seconds intervals and he does it like 2 times, you're like, he's going to fire that Fire Strike again in the next 6 seconds. So you just see it, you count 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm telling you, the amount of sleep darts I land on Reinhardts that do this is unreal because you just know how long that cooldown lasts and you're using your cooldowns. In fights that my Ana is really lacking when I'm not using my sleep dart. And I couldn't tell you how many games that I see Anas that just don't use sleep dart at all. Like it's actually amazing. Like you just see stuff like that. You'll see
you definitely don't want
like
to have your
it's hard to
abilities
explain
kinda
beyond
just,
that.
you don't want your abilities to just sit off cooldown for a really long time, right? You kind of want to be using your cooldowns as often as possible, with a caveat, and we'll go into that in a second over here. But if you're
Right.
watching players like Kabaji playing Tracer, or you're watching players like Chipsa playing Doomfist, or I don't know, somebody like Fleta or Agilities playing on Genji, it almost feels like they always have their ultimate or their abilities, and sometimes it can be frustrating. It's like, how is this Tracer always have blinks and
I always feel like
backtrack?
Genji has deflect for me. It's so
How is
annoying.
this Genji every time that he comes out have deflect? And it feels like they're almost like have it more often than other people do. And it's not really the case. It's just that they're really smart about how they use their cooldowns, and they're trying to use them as often as possible. A good Genji, every time he comes out of cover and starts firing at you, you can bet they have deflect, and they're intent on using it. They're actually coming out to bait you into firing at them so they can deflect it onto you. Once their deflect is down, they just dash away, lurk into the shadows, maybe throwing shurikens here and there. But after that 8 seconds is gone, you can bet that Genji is gonna come out again.
They're
And
coming back.
and guess what he has with him? Deflect. Yes. And that's why
Your Reinhardt's Fire Strike heading right back at you.
and that's why sometimes it feels like, why does this Genji always have deflect up? And it's because he indeed does. Every time
He's not showing up without it.
yeah, and every time he has an opportunity to deflect at you, he is gonna get aggressive. And every time that you actually get to see him, he has deflect up. When he doesn't have deflect up, he's kind of gone. Tracers will do the same thing, but they're utilizing their cooldowns as often as possible and as aggressively as possible as they can. That being said, and I said a caveat over here.
Here's the big caveat. Okay, here's the big one.
It's really not worth it using your cooldowns just to use them. Just to like,
That's right.
my nade is off a cooldown, let me just throw it out there kind of thing. You still have to kind of keep in mind what you're facing against. And this is the part where you have to be a little bit more like critical thinking about what you're doing inside of the game. Like, look at your team, look at the enemy team. What are you playing with? If you're playing in a composition like goats versus goats, the way that you're gonna use your cooldowns is way different than if you're playing like 2-2 versus dive, for example. And let's just take Anna as an example. When you're playing against goats, it is in your best interest to try to get as many nades on the enemy team as possible. Why? They're all clustered up together, they're huge
The whole goal is
bodies,
healing.
and they have an insane amount of healing. That is what makes that composition tick. But if you're able to get the Anna nade in bulk, get the Reinhardt, get the Zarya, you're gonna make him blow their cooldowns. You're gonna have to make him have to retreat. You're gonna get an insane amount of damage on ultimate charge on it. If you can bonus hit your Reinhardt and hit the enemy Reinhardt, you are doing a lot. You might have basically just won that fight off of that nade, basically. Even if you don't kill anybody, you might just force him to retreat and burn like 20 seconds off the clock just from that anti-nade. So in that composition, it makes sense. Every time that you see the front line, you see an opening, the D.Va is not matrixing at you, the Reinhardt maybe drop his shield to do fire
Zarya's
strike.
bubbles are down.
That's your cue right there, right? And you're trying to do that as often as possible. That puts an insane amount of pressure. But what happens when the enemy team is not playing goats? What if they have instead like a Tracer and Winston, or like a Genji and Winston? You can bet your ass that you start looking more like a juicy target, when before in goats you had almost no pressure, right? Like maybe every once in a while the Lucio spammed a little bit at you, or like you get hit by one Zenyatta orb here and there. Not much pressure on the Ana, right? But when you're going against a Winston and a Genji, tons of pressure. You're actually going to be their main target. And if it's not you, it's probably going to be your Zenyatta right next to you, or somebody equally vulnerable. In that case, you might be better off saving that nade for the dive, right? Is the Winston diving your Zenyatta? Boom! Anti-nade right there. Your Zenyatta is going to be okay. You're going to have an easy time healing him. Winston is going to be anti-naded and very vulnerable. Hopefully you still have your sleep there with it too, so you can save that for that as well. And this applies to like so many other heroes. Zarya, for example, is the same principle. When you're in goats, Reinhardt is one of the best targets for your shield, right? You're allowing him to get aggressive, you're building energy off of him. But if you're not playing against goats, maybe shielding your Reinhardt is just not the best idea, because there's nobody pressuring him, right? You're much better off maybe saving the shield for the dive when the Winston comes in. You bubble whoever he dives, and that's it. That puts a stop to the dive right there.
And also, like, just using abilities too early is also a big no-no that happens a lot in Overwatch. And the big ones would be Winston's bubble and Zarya bubbles. I can see this like one of the biggest things that is the most common at pretty much every rank. I can count, like, if I had a nickel for every one of these, I'd be a millionaire. Because like every time I play a game, there's at least one time where if a Zarya is there, they've bubbled somebody that's not taking any damage for no reason. It happens in every game, I swear. And if you're bubbling somebody, you better be bubbling somebody who is currently taking damage, not somebody who is about to take damage, and not somebody who is retreating and also just about to not take damage anymore. You need to communicate, I have bubble for you, Reinhardt, go in. So the second that shield drops, he's getting shot at, the bubble goes up. He can get 1-2 swings, put the shield back up. That's the whole point of how Reinhardt and Zarya are meant to work together here. And if you're doing a Winston Zarya, that's even worse, because then you get both of the things. You get the Winston jumping in with the barrier, and then he drops his barrier way too early. So he's jumping in the air, not taking any damage with the bubble on, and then drops his own bubble, and then he jumps out of the bubble by the time he's landed. So there's no point to either of these barriers. They're just completely wasted. Okay. and I'm trying to think of other things that like are different abilities. I'm thinking like Lucio. He has got a 4 seconds on that sonic wave and it doesn't consume ammo anymore. You should be utilizing that as much as you can in 1v1s, pushing people back, even just having a short cooldown ability like that. And you know that Genji is going to come in with a Dragon Blade at any minute, saving that and sitting on certain targets to make sure that you can boop him away, because he's going to have his dash up. Once he's used dash, you boop him away, he can't chase you anymore. There's all of these things like that. And
Ab-
Sombra's hack is another big one.
Absolutely. Actually, now that you brought up Lucio, I can give a good little example that kind of
Sure.
ties a lot of these concepts together. I was coaching one of our listeners last week, and he was actually doing a pretty fantastic job playing Lucio. Um, but at one point, he was having a little bit of trouble gaining back the point. He was playing in Busan in the mecha base, the close quarters one,
Mm-hmm.
and his teammates were playing Orisa and a Reaper, and he was playing Lucio. I think this was around um, silver or platinum. I can't remember. Gold or
Somewhere in that
platinum.
range, sure.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. And it was honestly not the best composition to play on that map. His Orisa, they didn't have control of the point, and his Orisa was kind of like up in the top, just bunkering down and firing at them. And the enemy team was kind of just hanging out at the point, gaining free percentage. They didn't have much pressure because his Orisa couldn't really come down and get the point for them like you can with a Hammond or a Reinhardt, right? Or
Sure.
a Winston. So instead, I told him, listen, let's ignore your Orisa for now, and instead let's focus on your Reaper because he seems like he's the one aggressive player that is taking the fight onto the point. So that was the first thing that we focused on. I was like, who is the player that can make things happen in this team fight? And we're like, let's stick to your Reaper. Try to speed boost that Reaper as much as you can. Make him close the gap into the enemy tanks. Try to boop people off of him like a Roadhog or anyone that tries to get near him. And get him to a point where he can actually do damage and put pressure on. He tried it like the first time, it didn't quite work that well. And then I told him, communicate this to your Reaper. Tell him that you're gonna be right behind him and helping him out. So he went ahead and I was like, Reaper, I'm gonna go in behind you this time. Second time he tried it, it worked out. It was a little rough around the edges, especially because it was just kind of like the two of them putting a lot of the pressure on. But his team followed up, right? Like his Reaper, I think, ended up dying, but the damage was done, and his teammates were able to kind of capture the point, mostly just by his positioning, right? He didn't outright kill anybody with Lucio, but he
But
allowed
the
his
aggression
Reaper.
initiated it.
Exactly. Now that they captured the point, I told him, okay, we don't need to focus on your Reaper now anymore. We have control of the point. Now your Orisa actually makes sense to hang out around with because now she's down below the point. She's kind of bunkering down there. So as long as she doesn't die, you get to keep the point. And at that point, I was like, forget all the Reddit Lucio stuff you have read. You're not gonna get fancy. You're not gonna be diving all over the place. Instead, literally just stay behind your Orisa, and anybody who comes, boop him away. And guess what? His Orisa never died. Mainly because at the rank, the enemy team wasn't putting that much pressure either. But like the one person that would realize we need to get the
When they
Orisa off
finally
of the
figured it out, it
point,
was too much and they
it
couldn't
was
do it.
it was already too late and the damage was done. They could never cross the Orisa shield because he was just hanging there, booping them away. So his Orisa never really had that much pressure on her, and eventually they edged out the fight and won. Not because of crazy Lucio plays. Honestly, it was one of the more boring Lucio plays, right? You just kind of like hanging around behind the Orisa shield, booping people away. But that was enough, right? You don't need like fancy plays,
You don't have to
riding
be
all the plays.
flashy.
You don't have to like carry the fight all on your shoulders. Actually, making the non-flashy play there and letting somebody else shine, but using your abilities was enough to just win that whole fight outright. So it was a combination of good positioning, using your abilities for the intent that they were made from, countering what the enemy team was doing, right? Like Lucio wasn't necessarily like hard countering any of the heroes, but what he was countering was their ability to close the gap on the Orisa. And that was enough, right? That was all they needed to win that point.
This example is just a good capstone of pretty much all of the topics we talked through for the episode today, as well as emphasizing the necessary means of doing these things, which is going to be communication as much as possible. If people are muting their mics, people are not joining team chat, don't tell them what to do. Don't even do like these things where people can just tilt. If they're there and they can listen and you can speak, then that is a huge boon to you. And then all of these things like communicating what you're doing, identifying who's on your team, who's on the enemy team, and then knowing your role. When you're playing Lucio, you have lots of things that you can do and choose to do depending on certain situations, what heroes are present, all of these things that Andres is bringing up. But you can do that on any hero. What am I supposed to be using this ability on against that team? Or what am I supposed to use this ability on with my team? These are questions that you should be using when you look at the abilities. The abilities are meant to be basic, but everything about Overwatch is not meant to have a basic nature when you want to climb. That's when you start to get into the more detailed aspects of the game and start advancing your game theory into game practice. And identifying these things, using your abilities, observing your teammates, communicating with them, making sure that you're using all of the abilities, having a decent overall awareness of the game when people are doing ultimates, predicting, positioning, aiming, and approaching and disengaging. These are all things that we talked about today. So let's close out the show by thanking some people over at patreon.com/Omnic Lab. These people are at the diamond sponsorship level. That means that they're paying the top dollar to get their names read off every week. We have Shazir, Top Score Solutions, Crimson Fail, Brendan D, Refire, Roger B, Chris DePlaya, Tragic Zach, Shepard, and Klaus. Thank you guys so much for all of this. I don't know if it's Klaus or Klaus, but there you go. The new patrons this week are, in fact, Klaus, Josh L., and Trinley. Thank you guys for your new patronage this week and this month. We really appreciate your patronage. It's helping us get to big events like the whole Overwatch League events that they're putting out on these I guess it's kind of like seasonal now, right? Each stage is having their own homestead to get it to. We have BlizzCon coming up.
Not every
Those
stage,
are all
but
big
it's
things.
getting there. It's getting there. I'm pretty excited. Coming up, it's Atlanta. I'm super excited for that one. And I think that it got leaked that the finals might be in Philly. So if that is the case, I'll probably be trying to attend. So I do appreciate everyone's support. It really helps us being able to attend all these events and be part of the community in person, right? In the flesh.
Absolutely. Big ups to people like Shazir also giving us 1,000 bits on live on our live stream at twitch.tv/Omnic Lab. We are affiliates there. You can give us bits. You can sub with your Twitch Prime, your Amazon Prime membership stuff gives you Twitch Prime. You can you can do a free sub every month. It's just manual. You can do it with real money. You can just do a regular thing. You're just like, I'm going to subscribe to these people. It's a great way to engage with the show. You can check out our VODs there or on our YouTube page. Andres, why don't you read our 2 iTunes reviews for the week? You'll take the first one, I'll take the second one.
Sounds good. Today we got 2 iTunes reviews. One comes from William saying, "You have my thanks. I just started playing Overwatch and this show has been a great guide to the game. Great tips and strategy and useful information to help build your own strategies. Keep it up, boys. I'm glad it's working out for you." And sorry, I was going to say, hopefully this episode satisfies that itch too.
Next one comes from Maggie HG on May 1st. It says, outstanding Overwatch analysis. The podcast offers outstanding balance of hero strategy, competitive ladder tips, meta-analysis, and occasional lore discussion. Those are personable and bring a passion and curiosity to the game. They have guests on that offer outstanding insight. This is perhaps the podcast I look forward to most each week. I really appreciate these sentiments, and that is a big heart thumper, I guess you could refer to it. I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's late, and Andres and I are both quarantined sick right now, but this means a lot to us that you guys are leaving these iTunes reviews. They don't happen very often, but when they do, they mean a lot, and they're free, and words are free, so you guys can do that whether you have an iTunes review in your back pocket or not. Please consider doing those today. You can also find the show on Spotify, which we are basically new to. Please follow us there and recommend that to your friends. If you guys want to find anything and everything to do with Omnic Lab, you guys can always find us at our website, omniclab.com. You can find all of our links at the links there, and pretty much everything else you're looking for. Please consider joining our online community. We have a bunch of new stuff going on in our Discord as well as our game nights. Discord.me/OmnicLab will generate an invitation to the Discord. If you can't find it, you can ask around. You can also tweet at us. We're very, very, very active on Twitter. Andres, speaking of which, where can people find you?
If you want to find me, you can always do so over at Twitter at iPlayGames. You spell that IPLAI Games.
You can find me on Twitter at the tag NotRob. If you want to see me streaming, I do that occasionally at twitch.tv/NotRobMay. And I've done stuff like Breath of the Wild streams on Switch. I have Smash Brothers, and also, of course, I've figured some things out for Overwatch. So if we're doing game nights, there's a good chance that Andres and I will be streaming, especially this next one. We're hoping to do it. And also, a big thank you for all of you who have been sticking with us for a long time and have listened to a lot of our backlog, because next week is our 3-year anniversary of the show. We don't really have anything planned just yet, but if we can get something working this week, then maybe we can get a big kibosh on capping out 3 years. If not, then we have 6 more weeks to prepare for the 156, which is the actual 3-year anniversary of the show, with regards to how many episode counts that we put out there. But Andres, you want to sign us off?
Absolutely. Thank you guys for listening to the show. Hopefully this is going to help you guys build up some of your own good habits. It's something that I try to do constantly to improve my gameplay. And one thing that we never mentioned in the show, but just leave you with a thought over here, find a framework, find a player that you look up to, whether it be like an owl player or a streamer or somebody that plays the heroes and the style that you like playing. And before you go into your matches, just like watch him for a match or two. And sometimes I really do that. It's kind of like a copy paste thing that I try to do in my mind. I try to like think, okay, why is he playing like this? And then when I go into my game, I try to get as close as possible to that. And it helps me kind of like reset my mind and not fall into bad habits, right? Like, oh, would this player do this in my case, or am I messing up over here? So, learn by imitation and be critical of your own play is the best way to improve. And obviously, if you want the little extra help, sign up for some coaching sessions. We're here for you. But that being said, happy hunting. Hope you guys have a good Overwatch season.
Great way to finish up the show with that little Easter egg. We'll see you guys next week. And remember, don't be a lab rat, be a scientist. We'll see you then on episode 150. Bye.
I have nothing more to teach you. The rest you must learn for yourself. Walk in harmony, my student.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Shaz.
Bye, Shaz.